Shokun! Welcome to Igor's Dojo, the training ground for honing your Japanese language skills. Today, we will be returning to one of the earlier topics, namely the verbs and their verb forms. Based on the feedback I have received regarding the original video, I have decided to revisit the topic, but this time covering one verb group at a time. This restructuring, so to speak, is mostly due to the complexity of both the earlier video and the topic itself, but if you don't mind the abundance of information and a detailed look at the entire verb system of the Japanese language, I'll provide a link to the original video both on the screen and in the description below. However, if you are more inclined towards a step-by-step system and towards a separated, focused view of the verb groups, then this video is for you. So, in the end, welcome to the first video in the verb trilogy dedicated to Ichidan verbs. Let's begin. Now, what is the aim of this video? The aim of this video is to completely demystify the Ichidan verbs or the one-step verbs, and the graphic that you see before you basically tells you all that you need to know about them. It shows you how to recognize them in the sentence based on their eru and iru endings, that they are also known as one-step verbs or class 1 verbs, and finally that they form their stems by modifying or removing the final syllable ru, as we will see when we examine each stem in detail. Also, there is one more thing worth addressing in this section, and that is the group of fake or disguised Ichidan verbs that appear with the endings eru and iru, but are in fact godan verbs, and they conjugate following the conjugation rules of godan verbs themselves. These are best memorized through practice and experience, but I recommend the old school method of conjugation, of practicing them with a piece of paper and a pencil, because believe it or not, this is the most efficient way to remember them. And as you can see from this table, there are a couple, or let's be more precise, a few of them that can easily appear in everyday conversation, such as kaeru to return, kagiru to be limited, hairu to enter, or hashiru to run. So, in this brief overview section of the video, I have devoted my time to providing you with the basic outline of Ichidan verbs, how can you recognize them in the sentence, what are they, and their other name, or their most famous other name, and that is the one-step verbs. So, with this covered, I will be moving on to the main topic of this video, and that is the stems of the Ichidan verbs, and our first stem is the Iralis Stem. The graphic on your left tells you all that you need to know about the Irrealis stem, in essence. That is known as the mizenke in Japanese, that it is used mostly with nai to form negatives, and finally that it is made by removing the final ru from the verb. We will examine all the stems in this way. You will see their Japanese name, their most famous suffix, and how they are formed. Now let's see the formation process on the three examples I have chosen to the left. And we have the verbs taberu, to eat, ageru, to give, and shinjiru, to believe. As you can see, they form their irrealis stems by removing the final ru, and we have with nai from taberu, tabenai, from ageru, agenai, and from shinjiru, shinji nai. So always remember, in order to get the irrealis stem is really quite easy, just remove the final ru and you are already set up. Now let's see this stem in action in some of our sentences. Kyou wa ringo o tabenai. I don't eat apples today. As you can see, this is the basic usage of a negative, and we have received our, let's say, irrealis stem from the verb taberu by simply removing the final ru and attaching nai. Now let's see our second sentence. Anata ni hon wo agenai. I will not give you a book. Once again, simple. And our third sentence. Kare no hanashi o shinjinai. I don't believe his story. So to summarize, in order to get the irrealis stem, you just need to take the dictionary form of the verb, remove the final ru, and that is all. Now, As you can see from this Iralis Stem section of the video, this is the pattern we will use to examine all the stems in our future sections. A graphic for essential information about the stem will always be on your left, then formation examples, and finally sentences that will demonstrate in usage, its usage will be on your left. Now let's move on to our second stem. Our second stem is the conjunctive stem, also known more famously in the books as the Masu stem. Like the Iralis stem before it, the conjunctive or the renyoke is formed by simply removing the final ru, as you can see in our formation examples here. Once again, I am taking the verbs taberu, ageru, and shinjiru. So only need to remove ru and attach the most representative suffix masu, and from taberu you will get tabemas, from ageru you will get agemas, and from shinjiru you will get shinjimas. So once again, very simple. In order to receive the conjunctive stem from your Ichidan verb, you only need to remove the final ru and you are finished. And once again, let's see them in action. Kyou wa ringo tabemasu. I will eat apples today. Our second sentence. Anata ni hon wo agemasu. I will give you a book. And our third. I believe his story, or in Japanese, kare no hanashi o shinjimasu. So, to summarize everything that you need to know for the conjunctive stem, you only need to remove the final ru, and that you can find it most famously paired with the suffix mas. Our third stem that we will cover is the dictionary stem. Now, the dictionary stem, like its name says, you can find in dictionaries, and it is used as the base material from which we create all the other stems, as you have already seen in the cases of the Iralis stem and the conjunctive stem. The dictionary stem is used mostly with nouns and auxiliary verbs such as so, rashi, or yo, to name a few. Now, let's take a look at our examples. Now, as you can see, nothing has really changed. We still have taberu in its dictionary as the dictionary stem, and ageru, shinjiru. We have been only adding so. Now, the topic of so is rather really complex, and I will not be getting into detail about it in this video, since this is not it's not the purpose of this video, and suffice it to say that so is equal to the English it looks like, and you will see this reflected in our example sentences. Kyou wa ringo o taberu sou desu. It looks that I will be eating apples today. Anata ni hon wo ageru sou desu. It looks like that I will be giving you a book. And our third, kare no hanashi o shinjiru sou desu. It looks like I am believing his story. Now, once again, so here is used only as the most famous suffix for the dictionary stem, and you only need to keep in mind that it is roughly equal to the English it looks like. It's your judgment based on the appearance of a certain thing or a certain action, as you can see from our examples here. So this is a topic that I will be covering in a future video, so and yo specifically, and for now just remember that it is roughly equal to the English it looks like. And to summarize the dictionary stem itself, you can see that there is no change here. You only need to use it in the same form that you can find it in dictionaries. Now, our next stem is the kate, or the conditional stem, that became synonymous with the conditional ba. For now, it will suffice to look at ba as the equivalent to the English if, since the topic of conditionals is rather complicated and tricky. Unlike the majority of Ichidan stems, the conditional stem is made by replacing the final ru with re, as we can see in our following examples. Now, in this, let's say, little section devoted to the conditional stem, you can see that from taberu we have removed ru, then added re, and we have received tabere, and only then I have added ba, thus receiving tabere ba, if I eat. Now we have the same case for ageru and shinjiru, thus we have agereba and shinjireba. And once again, remember ba here for the time being as equivalent to the English if. So the translations of our verbs here would be if I eat, if I give, if I believe. Now, this will be a lot more clearly reflected in our example sentences. If you eat an apple, or in Japanese, ringo o tabereba, anata ni hon wo agereba, if I give you the book, and finally, kare no hanashi o shinjireba, if you believe his story. Now, the conditional stem, or the kateke, is the first stem where we need to take some action in order to receive it. So, we first need to remove the final ru from the dictionary stem that we have covered before it, and then add re. And in that way, you have already received the conditional stem. But since ba is really the most famous suffix for the conditional stem, I have decided to use it here to make your conjugation practice even easier. And I strongly suggest that you use ba when you practice conjugation of these verbs, and really use every most famous suffix that we have illustrated, that I have illustrated here in the video, because it will make the practice of verb conjugation a lot easier and more interesting, and you will not grow easily bored with it. So once again, the conditional stem is received for Ichidan verbs by first removing ru and only then adding re, and of course you can always add ba to make it more easy to remember. Now, our next stem is the suryo, or the volitional stem of Ichidan verbs, that can be translated to the English let's or shall, implying a call to action or a suggestion. The formation is simple. Just remove the final ru, as we have seen with the Iralis stem and the conjunctive stem before it, and then attach yo, as you can see here. Now, we have done this process for the verbs taberu, ageru, and shinjiru, our three verbs that I have used as examples, and as you can see, I have removed the final ru, and I have received tabeyo, then ageyo, and shinji yo. Now let's see them in sentences, and you will see that the volitional stem is rather easy to use and remember. Kyou wa ringo o tabeyo. Let's eat an apple today. Now, like I have said, this is the first, let's say, most famous translation of the volitional stem when you have attached yo to the stem, and that means let's do something, or in that vein, when you call a certain person or a group of people to action, or when you are suggesting an action, like in our second sentence, hon wo ageyo ka, shall I give the book to you, implying that you are talking to someone. And our final third sentence shows once again the exact same usage, kare no hanashi o shinjiyo ka, shall we believe his story, or you can always translate as shall I believe his story. Now let's summarize this volitional stem. As you can see, volitional stem is made in the same way as our first two stems, by simply removing the final ru and then attaching the most famous suffix to it, and that is yo in this case. And we have received a verb form that is equivalent to the English shall we do something, or shall I do something, or let's do something. And once again, I would like to differentiate here the two terms, the verb stem and the verb form. I know that it is pretty late in the video to do this, let's say, distinction, but I believe that you already have gotten the basic gist of it. When you have the stem, you can always, let's say, manipulate it and attach various suffixes to it to get various verb forms. So once again, as I have stated in the original video, much earlier than in this one. Verb stems and verb forms are not the same. I know that probably most of the viewers that are watching my channel know this already, but it is always worth repeating. So remember that when you have the volitional stem, you do not have the volitional form. You have the volitional form only when you add yo, but until then you have a volitional stem and nothing more. So once again, always remember, in order to get the volitional stem, need to remove ru and add yo. Before we move on to the final stem, we must take a look at the mere stem or the imperative that is formed by replacing ru with ro as shown here. From taberu we have tabero, from ageru we have agero, from shinjiru we have shinjiro. As you can see, or as you can hear more precisely from my raised tone of voice, you need to pronounce this imperative stem or imperative form correctly, and that is by raising your voice, especially towards the final syllable. Now, the imperative stem is, let's say, special and different from other stems because in essence it is already a form. It is the imperative form because it does not have any other suffixes that you need to remember, because in a way when you form the imperative stem you already have the imperative form, or let's say the commanding form of the Ichidan verbs that you are conjugating. Let's see this in our sentences. Ringo wo tabero, eat the apple. Hon wo agero, give the book. And our final, kare no hanashi o shinjiro, believe his story. As you might have guessed, this stem, and by extension this form, is used to issue orders and commands, and obviously it is considered rude in conversation, so always keep that in mind when talking with Japanese people or fellow students who are also learning Japanese. And the final stem is the versatile ta and te stem, a stem with a variety of usages, the number of which can be even impossible to express. Just in our video previously, we have seen both ta and te appear with bakari, so it is really an important stem to master. Here are some examples with our three verbs that I have used up until now. Taberu, ageru, and shinjiru. As you can see, the formation process is also easy. Just remove the final ru and then attach ta or te depending on, let's say, the form you are trying to use. So we have tabete or tabeta, agete or ageta, shinjite or shinjita. Now, let us see this use in our example sentences. Ringo wo tabeta, I ate the apple. Hon wo ageta, I gave the book. And our third, kare no hanashi o shinjiteimasu, I am believing his story. Now, if you want to make this, let's say, process of remembering the ta and te stem even easier, you can always remember that ta is simply the simple past tense of the Japanese language, and you can remember it as the simple past, while the te always is used in some kind of, let's say, verb expressions or special expressions in the Japanese language to indicate that there is a certain continuous action taking place, being equivalent to the English continuous tenses. So you can remember them in that way, and I really suggest doing that because it will make the learning process of all the other all the other particles, special expressions, and so on easier for you. So keep in mind that ta is the simple past form and te is equivalent to the various English continuous tenses. Now, that is really, my dear Shokun, all that you need to know about the Ichidan verb stems. I know that there is a ton of information to remember, but that is why I have created a table here with shiraberu to summarize all the stems. So shiraberu means to check or investigate, and here are the examples. As we can recall, the Iralis stem is created by removing the final ru, so we have shirabe. Then we have the conjunctive stem that follows the previous method of construction, and we also have shirabe. And then we have the easiest stem of them all, and that is the dictionary stem, and that is shiraberu. Then we have the conditional stem, the first stem where you need to do something in order to receive it, and that is shirabere. After that we have the volitional, shirabe. After that, imperative, shirabero, the only stem that is a form in itself. And finally, the versatile ta and te stem, shirabeta or shirabe te, and with this we have rounded up all the necessary stems that you need to know in order to master the Ichidan verbs. So once again, how do I recommend you to practice all of these stems and their conjugations, or their creation to be more specific? Well, I suggest memorizing the most famous of the suffixes that we have seen in our video, which go with each of these stems. So, for example, the Iralis stem is the famous negative, for example, because it is used with nai. After that, we have the conjunctive stem that you can also remember by the usage of masu, very frequent usage of masu. Then you can remember the dictionary stem is really the only stem that is never changed. After that, we have the conditional stem that is equivalent to the ba condition, ba, for example, conditional usage, because it is always goes with ba, shira be re ba. And after that, we have the volitional stem with yo. We have shira be yo if you want to practice it like that. And the imperative stem and the ta and te stem are pretty much the same. Now, as you can see from this table, I suggest that you do something similar on a piece of paper. You can always align first the stems by their name in one column. After that, pick a verb, simply pick a verb from a dictionary that you would like to conjugate. Otsukare-sama deshita, dear Shokun. We have completed the first video in the trilogy, in which we have summarized the Ichidan stems and laid some basic groundwork for the next video that will focus on godan verbs and the specifics that follow their conjugation process. Until then, I recommend practicing the construction of Ichidan stems as we have outlined in the previous section, as well as experimenting with sentences where you will use the most important forms which are built with an appropriate stem. So until the next video, thank you for watching, my dear Shokun, and I hope to see you again in the dojo next time. Sayonara!